Bikers harass a senior nurse until her veteran husband and his K9s arrive to set things straight. The thunderous roar of motorcycles tore through the quiet evening, shattering the exhaustion-induced haze clinging to Maggie Reynolds. Her hands clenched the steering wheel as the bikers cruised down her street, their chrome pipes spitting noise and their engines rumbling like angry beasts. They didn't pass. They settled menacingly on the corner. Maggie, a nurse used to crisis, whispered, "Just ignore them." But her legs felt heavy with something colder than fatigue as she climbed out of the car. The keychain jingled in her trembling fingers. A gravelly voice sliced through the evening air. "Hey there, sweetheart!" Heavy footsteps approached from behind. She forced herself to face the threat. He was tall, broad, his leather vest covered in patches, and his eyes held a mean glint. "Nice neighborhood you got here," the biker said, moving closer, his bulk blocking her path to the door. "Excuse me," Maggie said, trying to step around him. "I need to get inside." "What's your hurry? We're just being friendly." Behind him, his companion's laughter was cruel and mocking. "Please move," Maggie insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. Instead of stepping aside, his hand shot out. Before Maggie could react, he shoved her. Hard. She slammed against her car door, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. Her purse clattered to the concrete, spilling its contents in the fading light. Pain bloomed across her back. Maggie gasped for air, struggling to stay upright. The biker's laughter boomed. "Better keep quiet around here, lady," he sneered, his face inches from hers. "Not all of us are as nice as we look." They sauntered back to their bikes, leaving Maggie trembling, clutching her side. She snatched up her scattered belongings, fumbling the key into the lock. Inside, she slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. Maggie slid down to the floor, her back pressed against the cold wood, heart hammering. She pulled out her phone, dialing 911, but her finger froze over the call button. What if they retaliated? Doubt, cold and paralyzing, choked her. She was the one who helped others she didn't freeze. Yet, here she was, her training dissolving into pure, shaking fear. She lowered the phone, the conflict churning in her gut. Outside, the motorcycles revved menacingly, a final brutal reminder that her sanctuary was gone. The fear of direct action was now locked inside with her. Maggie's hands trembled as she poured hot water over her chamomile tea bag. Steam curled up from the blue ceramic mug, carrying the soothing scent of flowers. She needed something, anything, to calm her nerves after the encounter with the bikers. A firm knock at the front door made her jump, splashing hot tea onto her hand. She quickly dabbed at the spill with a dish towel, her heart racing until she heard a familiar voice. "Maggie? Did you forget to leave the door unlocked again?" Relief flooded through her as she recognized Jim's deep, steady tone. She took a deep breath, willing her face to appear normal, and opened the door. Her husband stood there, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe, weather-worn features creased in a gentle smile. "Sorry, honey." "Force of habit," Maggie said, stepping aside to let him in. She noticed the slight limp in his walk. His old military injury always acted up after long visits with his veteran friends. Jim hung his jacket by the door and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. "How was your shift today?" "Oh, you know, the usual." Maggie picked up her tea, grateful that the mug hid her trembling fingers. "Busy emergency room. Lots of paperwork." Jim's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her face. After 30 years of marriage, he could read her like a book. "Everything okay? You seem a bit off." "Just tired," Maggie assured him, forcing a smile. "Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." She watched as Jim moved to the kitchen, pulling out pots and pans for dinner. His movements were precise and methodical, habits ingrained from his military days. The familiar sounds of him cooking should have been comforting, but Maggie couldn't shake the memory of the biker's sneering face. "I'm thinking spaghetti tonight," Jim called over his shoulder. "That all right with you?" "Perfect," Maggie answered, sinking into her favorite armchair. She sipped her tea, trying to focus on the present moment. The smell of garlic and olive oil filling the kitchen, the gentle clink of utensils, Jim humming softly as he cooked. But her mind kept drifting back to the incident. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the rough hands shoving her against the car, heard the cruel laughter. Her back still ached from the impact. They ate dinner together at their small kitchen table, Jim telling her about his visit with his old friend from the service. Maggie nodded at all the right moments, but her attention kept wandering to the windows, checking for movement outside. After they'd cleared the dishes, Jim grabbed the leashes hanging by the door. Rex and Max, their German shepherds, immediately perked up from their spots in the living room. "Going to take the boys for their evening walk," Jim said, clipping the leashes to the dogs' collars. "Want to join us?" Maggie shook her head, settling onto the couch. "Think I'll rest here for a bit. My feet are killing me." Jim nodded, understanding, and headed out with the dogs, leaving Maggie alone with her thoughts. The house felt too quiet now. She pulled an Afghan over her legs, trying to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Through the window, she could see the empty street, peaceful in the gathering darkness. But something felt wrong. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes watching the house, watching her. Maggie adjusted her nurse's uniform in front of the hallway mirror, double-checking that her name tag was straight. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, creating warm patches on the carpet. She grabbed her purse from the kitchen counter and headed toward the front door, ready for another shift at the hospital. The familiar rumble of motorcycles made her freeze. Her hand tightened on the doorknob as the sound grew louder, echoing down the quiet street. Through the window, she saw them. The same group of bikers from yesterday, their leather jackets gleaming in the sunlight. They had parked their bikes right across from her house, engines revving unnecessarily loud. Maggie's stomach churned. She thought about calling Jim, but he was in a meeting with his veteran support group. Besides, she couldn't let these men control her life with fear. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and stepped outside. The late afternoon heat hit her as she walked down her driveway. The bikers watched her approach, their expressions a mix of amusement and something darker. Maggie kept her voice steady as she addressed them. "Excuse me," she said, maintaining a professional tone like she used with difficult patients. "Would you mind moving somewhere else? This is a residential area, and the noise is disturbing the neighborhood." One of the bikers, a heavy-set man with a scraggly beard, laughed. "Well, well, look who's got some nerve today, boys." He took a step closer, forcing Maggie to back up slightly. The smell of cigarettes and leather filled her nose. "Sweet little nurse trying to give us orders," another one called out. "Maybe we like it here. Nice view and all." His eyes traveled up and down her body, making her skin crawl. The first biker moved even closer, invading her personal space. "What you gonna do about it, sweetheart? Call your husband?" He reached out as if to touch her face. Maggie stepped back quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her hands were trembling, but she kept her voice firm. "I'm asking you nicely to leave. The next time, it will be the police asking." Their laughter followed her as she turned and walked briskly back to her house. She could hear them making crude comments, but she forced herself not to run. The moment she got inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, her legs weak with relief. With shaking fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed Jim's number. He answered on the second ring. "Jim," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "The bikers are back. They're parked outside our house." "What?" His voice was sharp with concern. "Did they hurt you?" "I'm coming home right now." "No, no," Maggie said quickly. "I'm fine. I tried talking to them, asking them to leave." They wouldn't listen. She paused, hearing the bikes rev up again outside. "Don't leave your meeting early. I'm heading to work anyway. Maggie, this isn't okay. I'll handle it when I get home." The edge in Jim's voice was unmistakable. "Really, I'm fine," she insisted, even as her free hand clenched into a fist. "They're just trying to intimidate me." "Don't worry." But as she hung up the phone, Maggie knew she was lying to both Jim and herself. The look in those men's eyes, the way they'd moved closer, the threats barely hidden in their words, it was all escalating. She grabbed her car keys, dreading the walk to her car but knowing she couldn't miss her shift. The roar of motorcycles outside seemed to mock her attempts at bravery. Jim pulled into the driveway just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across their quiet neighborhood. The moment he stepped through the front door, he knew something was wrong. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Her shoulders were tense, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. "Maggie?" he asked softly, hanging up his jacket. Rex and Max padded in behind him, their nails clicking against the hardwood floor. They sensed the tension, too, moving closer to Maggie with concerned whines. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. Her voice trembled slightly. "Just tired from work." Jim pulled out a chair and sat down beside her, gently placing his hand over hers. "You're shaking." Maggie took a deep breath, and the words tumbled out. "The bikers came back today. They they won't leave me alone. One of them got too close, and she swallowed hard. "I didn't want to worry you." Jim's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Tell me everything." As Maggie recounted the harassment, Jim's expression grew darker, but he maintained his composure. Years of military training had taught him to keep his emotions in check, even when rage burned beneath the surface. "I'll handle this," he said finally, standing up. Rex and Max immediately moved to his side, alert and ready. "Stay here. Jim, please be careful," Maggie called after him. Worry etched across her face. Outside, the evening air was thick with tension. The bikers were still there, their motorcycles lined up along the curb. Empty beer cans littered the ground around them, and their loud laughter echoed through the street. Jim walked purposefully toward them, Rex and Max flanking him. The dogs' posture was rigid, their training evident in every controlled step. As they approached, one of the bikers nudged another, and the group turned to face them. "We need to talk," Jim said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from years of command. The leader of the group, the one who had harassed Maggie, stepped forward with a smirk. "Well, look who it is. The old man's come to save the day." He glanced at his friends, encouraging their laughter. "You're going to stay away from my wife," Jim stated firmly. "This is your only warning." The biker took another step forward, but Rex and Max responded with deep, menacing growls. Their training kicked in immediately. They didn't lunge or bark, just stood their ground, teeth bared. "What are you gonna do?" the biker sneered, but Jim noticed his eyes darting nervously between the dogs. "Sick your pets on us?" "These aren't pets," Jim replied calmly. "They're trained military K9s. And they don't take kindly to threats." The atmosphere shifted. The other bikers began to shuffle uncomfortably, their bravado wavering as Rex and Max continued their low, threatening growls. "Come on, man," one of the other bikers muttered to their leader. "This ain't worth it." After a tense moment, the leader backed away, trying to maintain his tough image. "Whatever, old man. This neighborhood's boring anyway." The bikers mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life. As they pulled away, their leader shot Jim a dark look. But the message had been received. Jim waited until they disappeared around the corner before heading back inside. He found Maggie standing by the window, wringing her hands. "They're gone," he said simply, pulling her into a gentle embrace, "and they won't be coming back." The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Jim pulled on his jacket, getting ready to leave for his veterans meeting. Maggie watched him from the kitchen window, a cup of coffee warming her hands. His presence over the past day had made her feel protected, but now that he was leaving, a familiar unease crept back into her thoughts. "I'll be back in a few hours," Jim said, giving her a quick kiss. "Call me if anything happens." His eyes were serious, carrying the weight of yesterday's confrontation. "I'll be fine," Maggie assured him, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "The meeting's important. Don't worry about me." After Jim left, Maggie busied herself with her morning routine, getting ready for her hospital shift. She kept glancing out the windows, checking the street. Everything seemed normal: birds chirping, neighbors walking their dogs, the usual morning traffic passing by. Maybe the bikers had finally gotten the message, but as she stepped out of her house, her heart dropped. There, about 20 feet from her driveway, was a motorcycle she recognized from yesterday. Its chrome gleamed in the morning light, and beside it stood one of the bikers, his leather jacket creaking as he turned to face her. Maggie's hands trembled as she clutched her purse closer. She forced herself to walk to her car, trying to appear calm despite her racing pulse. The biker didn't move or speak, but as she reached for her car door, he made a slow, deliberate gesture. His finger traced a line across her car's hood, mimicking the motion of keying the paint. The message was clear: "We're still here. We're watching." Maggie's throat went dry, but she managed to get into her car without showing how rattled she was. Her hands shook as she started the engine, and she had to take several deep breaths before pulling out of the driveway. At the hospital, Maggie tried to lose herself in her work, but her mind kept wandering back to that threatening gesture. During her rounds, she mixed up two patients' charts, something she'd never done before. Her colleagues noticed her distraction. "Everything okay, Maggie?" Sarah, another nurse, asked during their lunch break. "You seem a bit off today." Maggie hesitated before sharing her story. She told them about the bikers, the harassment, and Jim's confrontation. But as she spoke, she could see the skepticism in their faces. "Maybe they're just showing off," one colleague suggested with a shrug. "You know how those types are. All noise, no real threat." "Have you called the police?" Sarah asked, but her tone suggested she thought Maggie was overreacting. "Not yet," Maggie replied, feeling increasingly isolated. "It's complicated." The rest of her shift dragged on endlessly. She made more small mistakes, nothing serious, but enough to notice. Her usually steady hands shook while taking blood pressure readings, and she had to double-check every medication dosage. By the time her shift ended, Maggie felt exhausted, not just from work, but from carrying this weight alone. Her colleagues' dismissive responses had left her feeling more vulnerable than before. As she walked to her car in the hospital parking lot, every shadow made her jump, every motorcycle sound made her heart race. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maggie's driveway as she pulled up to her house after her shift. Her shoulders ached from the long hours of caring for patients, and all she wanted was to sink into her favorite armchair with a cup of tea. But as she stepped out of her car, something caught her eye that made her blood run cold. Her second car, the one she'd left parked in the driveway that morning, wasn't the same. Deep, angry scratches marred its once pristine surface, the metal beneath the paint exposed like open wounds. Maggie's hands trembled as she moved closer, her breath catching in her throat. "No, no, no," she whispered, running her fingers along one of the deep gouges that stretched from headlight to taillight. The damage was deliberate, methodical. Words had been carved into the hood. "Next time it's you." Her stomach lurched. The quiet street suddenly felt threatening, as if eyes were watching from every shadow. Maggie fumbled in her purse for her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she could hardly grip it. She hit Jim's speed dial number, pressing the phone to her ear as she backed toward her front door. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "Jim," she whispered into the phone, her voice breaking. "Please call me as soon as you get this. They, they vandalized the car. They left a threat. I need you." Maggie ended the call and tried again, but still no answer. She knew he was at his veterans meeting, where phones were supposed to be silent, but right now that knowledge didn't help the rising panic in her chest. Inside the house, Maggie paced back and forth, her nurse's shoes squeaking against the hardwood floor. Her training had taught her to stay calm in emergencies, to think clearly and act decisively. But this was different. This was personal. She stopped at the window, looking out at the damaged car. The threat carved into its hood seemed to mock her. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. These men thought they could intimidate her, make her live in fear in her own home. "Enough," she said aloud, her voice stronger than she felt. She grabbed her phone again, but this time she dialed the police station's number. The drive to the police station felt longer than usual. Every motorcycle she passed made her flinch, and she kept checking her rear-view mirror, half expecting to see the bikers following her. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she filled out the report, describing each incident in detail: the initial confrontation, the intimidation, and now, the vandalism. The officer taking her report was kind but distant, treating it like just another case of vandalism. "We'll increase patrols in your area," he assured her. But Maggie could tell he didn't grasp the full weight of her fear. As she walked back to her car in the station's parking lot, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. It should have been beautiful, but all Maggie could think about was how alone she felt. Jim was unreachable. The police seemed unconcerned. And somewhere out there, the bikers were probably laughing about what they'd done. She got into her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The station's lights grew smaller in her rearview mirror as she drove away, and with each passing mile, the weight of her solitude pressed heavier on her shoulders. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight when Jim finally walked through the front door. His eyes immediately landed on Maggie, who sat rigid in her favorite armchair, hands clutched around a cold cup of tea. The dim light from the table lamp cast shadows across her face, highlighting the worry lines that hadn't been there this morning. "Maggie?" Jim's voice was soft but urgent. Rex and Max padded in behind him, sensing the tension in the room. They moved to Maggie's side, offering silent comfort as they always did. "They vandalized my car, Jim," Maggie said, her voice trembling slightly. She reached into her purse and pulled out the police report, holding it out to him. "I went to the station this afternoon." Jim's jaw clenched as he read through the report. His hands tightened on the paper, creating small creases at the edges. The muscles in his neck tensed, but his voice remained steady. "Tell me everything," Maggie explained about finding the deep scratches on her car, the threatening graffiti. With each detail, Jim's expression grew darker, but his eyes never left her face. When she finished, he set the report down on the coffee table and pulled a chair close to her. "We're going to handle this," he said firmly. "Together." He reached for her hand, his weathered fingers wrapping around hers. "These people think they can intimidate us? They don't know who they're dealing with." Rex and Max sat alert at their feet, their ears perked forward, as if they understood every word. Jim patted their heads absently, his military training already kicking in as he formulated a plan. "First thing tomorrow, we'll start patrolling the neighborhood," he said. "Rex and Max will help us keep watch. These dogs are trained to detect trouble before it starts." The German shepherd's ears perked up at their names, their intelligent eyes focused on Jim. Maggie nodded slowly, drawing strength from his certainty. "What about when I'm at work?" "I'll drive you," Jim said without hesitation, "and pick you up. The dogs and I will keep an eye on things while you're gone." He squeezed her hand. "No more facing this alone, Maggie." She felt tears prick at her eyes, not from fear this time, but from relief. The weight she'd been carrying seemed a little lighter now that she was sharing it. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you sooner. Hey, Jim said softly, reaching up to wipe away a tear that had escaped. You're the strongest person I know, but you don't have to be strong alone. They spent the next hour planning their strategy. Jim drew from his military experience, mapping out routine check times and potential watch points. Maggie contributed her knowledge of the neighborhood's layout and the bikers' usual haunting spots. When morning came, they were ready. Jim and Maggie stepped out onto their front porch, Rex and Max flanking them like silent guardians. The early morning air was crisp, and the street was quiet, almost too quiet. They began their walk through the neighborhood, Jim's trained eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Maggie walked beside him, her steps matching his. Despite the fear still lingering in her chest, she felt stronger with Jim beside her. Rex and Max moved with practiced precision, their training evident in every alert movement. As they rounded the corner of their block, Jim reached for Maggie's hand. They shared a look of understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The unease hung heavy in the air around them, but they were no longer afraid to confront it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the park's grass as Jim stood his ground, Rex and Max alert at his sides. The group of bikers lounged on their motorcycles near the playground equipment, their leather jackets gleaming in the early light. Jim's jaw tightened when he spotted them 5 men, their faces hard with barely contained aggression. One of them, a burly man with a scraggly beard, nudged his companions and nodded toward Jim. Their laughter carried across the empty park, sharp and mocking. Jim didn't move, his military training kicking in as he assessed the situation. Rex and Max's ears perked forward, their bodies tensing as they sensed the growing hostility. The bearded biker pushed off his motorcycle and swaggered toward Jim, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "Well, well, if it isn't the old-timer and his puppies," he called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "Come to show us who's boss again?" Jim's expression remained neutral, but his hand instinctively tightened on Rex's leash. "You're not welcome here anymore," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd faced far worse threats. "This is a family neighborhood." The other bikers gathered behind their leader, forming a loose semicircle. Their grins were predatory, confident in their numbers. "Family neighborhood?" the leader sneered. "Ain't that sweet? And what are you going to do about it, Grandpa? Sick your dogs on us?" As if on cue, Rex and Max lowered their heads, deep growls rumbling in their chests. The bikers shifted slightly, but Jim noticed something different in their stance today. Where before there had been uncertainty, now there was only challenge in their eyes. "Last warning," Jim said evenly. "Leave the neighborhood. Leave my wife alone, or things will get ugly." The leader took another step forward, close enough now that Jim could smell the cigarette smoke on his breath. "Maybe we like ugly," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Maybe we're just getting started." Jim felt the shift in the air, the way the other bikers spread out slightly, their body language screaming aggression. These men weren't backing down anymore. They'd made a decision this was their territory now, and they weren't about to let an old man and his dogs chase them away. "Your choice," Jim said, his words clipped and final. He turned slowly, keeping the dogs between himself and the bikers as he walked away. Their laughter followed him, but it wasn't the same nervous laughter from before. This was darker, more threatening. The walk home seemed longer than usual, each step measured and deliberate. Jim's mind was already working through scenarios, planning for what he knew was coming. These men had made their intentions clear. They weren't just passing through anymore. They were here to stay, to intimidate, to control. When he stepped through the front door, Maggie was waiting, her face lined with worry. She took one look at his expression and knew something had changed. "They're back?" she asked softly. Jim nodded, letting Rex and Max off their leashes. The dogs moved to their usual spots by the window, still alert and watchful. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," he said, pulling Maggie into a gentle embrace. "But we'll be ready. I promise you that." The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Maggie prepared her first cup of coffee. Her hands were steady now, unlike the trembling she'd experienced yesterday. The routine felt normal, almost peaceful. Maybe things would get better. She opened the front door to grab the morning paper, but something else caught her eye. A folded piece of paper lay on the welcome mat, weighted down by a small rock. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up with shaking fingers. The message was written in thick black marker, the letters jagged and angry. "You're not safe here." Maggie's coffee cup slipped from her grip, shattering on the porch. Hot liquid splashed across her feet, but she barely noticed. The words on the paper seemed to pulse before her eyes, making her dizzy. "Maggie?" Jim's voice called from inside. "Everything okay?" She couldn't find her voice. The paper trembled in her hands as Jim appeared in the doorway. One look at her face told him everything he needed to know. Rex and Max pushed past him, circling Maggie protectively as Jim took the note from her hands. His jaw tightened as he read it. "Come inside," he said quietly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The dogs followed them, alert and watchful. In the kitchen, Maggie sank into a chair while Jim cleaned up the broken cup on the porch. When he returned, his face was set with determination. "We need to take this to the police," he said, placing the note on the table between them. Maggie stared at it, her throat tight. "Will it make any difference?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "They'll just say there's no proof it was the bikers." Jim pulled his chair closer to hers, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, steady. "Maybe not, but we need to document everything. Build a case." He squeezed her fingers. "We can't let them think they've won." Maggie looked into his eyes, seeing the strength there that had first drawn her to him. "I'm tired of feeling afraid in my own home," she admitted. "I know, sweetheart." Jim's voice was gentle but firm. "But we're going to get through this, together." Rex padded over, laying his head on Maggie's lap. She scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Max stood at attention by the window, keeping watch. "I'm going to increase our patrols," Jim said, his military background evident in his tactical thinking. "The dogs and I will check the perimeter more frequently, and I've got some ideas about security cameras." For the first time that morning, Maggie felt something other than fear. Jim's calm confidence was contagious, and the protective presence of Rex and Max made her feel less vulnerable. "You're right," she said, straightening her shoulders. "We can't let them win." She looked at the note again, but this time it didn't seem quite so threatening. "Maybe we should start keeping a record of everything that's happened. Times, dates, descriptions." Jim nodded approvingly. "That's my girl." He stood up, his expression determined. "Let's get ready and head to the station. We'll file a report about the note, and then we'll start making some changes around here." Maggie watched as Jim checked the windows and doors, Rex and Max following his every move. The fear wasn't gone, but it was different now. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Maggie organized patient charts at the nurse's station. Her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through the paperwork, her mind drifting back to the threatening note she'd found that morning. The weight of fear had become a constant companion, making even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Sarah, a fellow nurse who had worked with Maggie for over a decade, noticed her distraction. "Everything okay, Maggie? You seem off today." Maggie's shoulders slumped. She glanced around the quiet hallway and lowered her voice. "Actually, no. I've been dealing with some harassment at home. A group of bikers has been threatening me." Sarah's eyes widened with concern. She pulled up a chair next to Maggie. "That's terrible. Have you reported it?" "I filed a report about the car vandalism, but—" Maggie's voice trailed off. I know exactly how you feel, Sarah said, touching Maggie's arm gently. Last year, I had a stalker, an ex-patient who wouldn't leave me alone. I was terrified to even check my mail. Maggie looked up, surprised. Sarah had never mentioned this before. Linda, another nurse who had been listening nearby, joined their conversation. It happened to me, too. My neighbor kept threatening me after I complained about his loud music. He'd wait outside my house, following me to my car. I felt helpless for months. As their shift progressed, more colleagues shared their stories. Janet spoke about an aggressive ex-boyfriend who wouldn't take no for an answer. Maria described her experience with an angry driver who had followed her home after a minor traffic incident. Each story resonated with Maggie, making her feel less isolated. These women, her friends and colleagues, had faced their own battles with fear and intimidation. Some had found help through restraining orders, others through community support groups. During their lunch break, Beth, one of the older nurses, pulled Maggie aside. "You know what helped me when I was being harassed? Documentation. Write down every incident, take photos, save any messages. The police might say they can't do much now, but evidence builds a case." Maggie nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was standing up against the kind of intimidation that affected so many women in her community. Back at her station, Maggie pulled out her phone. With steady fingers, she dialed the local police department's non-emergency number. The dispatcher's voice was professional but sympathetic as Maggie detailed the escalating harassment. NOI, the initial confrontation, the vandalism, and now the threatening note. "Ma'am, we'll create a case file," the dispatcher said. "Your case number is 2023 to 4789. However, I need to be honest with you. Without more concrete evidence or witnesses, there's not much we can do right now." Maggie had expected this response, but it didn't deflate her newfound resolve. "I understand, but I want this on record, and I'll be documenting everything from now on." After hanging up, Maggie looked around at her coworkers. These strong women who had faced their own battles and emerged stronger. Their support had transformed her fear into determination. She might still be afraid, but she wasn't alone anymore, and she wasn't going to let the bikers win. Jim stood at the living room window, his jaw tight as he watched another group of bikers cruise past their house for the third time that morning. Rex and Max sat alert at his feet, their ears perked and bodies tense. The dogs could sense his growing frustration. "That's the 5th day in a row," Maggie said softly from behind him. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, but he could feel her trembling slightly. Jim turned to face his wife, noting the dark circles under her eyes. Neither of them had been sleeping well since the harassment began. The bikers had become bolder, riding past at all hours, revving their engines in the middle of the night and leaving tire marks on their driveway. "They think they can wear us down," Jim said, his voice low and controlled. "But they don't know who they're dealing with." He reached down to pat Rex's head, the German shepherd's muscles coiled with anticipation. Maggie sank into her favorite armchair, wringing her hands. "What can we do? The police say they can't do anything unless the bikers actually break the law." Jim watched another motorcycle roll past their house, the rider deliberately slowing down to stare at their windows. His military training kicked in, assessing the situation with tactical precision. "We're not going to wait for them to escalate further. It's time to take a stand." "What do you mean?" Maggie asked, sitting up straighter. "They want to play games? Fine. But we're going to do this on our terms." Jim's voice carried the weight of his years of experience. "We're going to confront them. Today. Right now." Maggie stood up, her face a mixture of fear and determination. "Together?" "Together," Jim confirmed, reaching for her hand. "You and me, with Rex and Max. Show them we're not afraid." He grabbed the dogs' leashes, though he knew he wouldn't need them. Rex and Max were perfectly trained, ready to respond to his commands at a moment's notice. The four of them stepped out onto their front porch, the afternoon sun beating down on them. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder as they approached the corner where the bikers usually gathered. Jim could feel Maggie's grip tighten on his arm, but her steps never faltered. Rex and Max walked beside them, their presence commanding and intimidating. As they reached the corner, they spotted 5 bikers lounging against their motorcycles. The largest one, who had shoved Maggie that first day, straightened up when he saw them approaching, his face twisted into a sneer. "Well, well," the biker called out. "The old-timers brought his puppies for a walk." Jim didn't respond immediately. Instead, he positioned himself slightly in front of Maggie, Rex, and Max, flanking them on either side. Dog's low growls sent a clear message. They weren't here to play. "This ends now," Jim said, his voice carrying across the distance between them. Each word was measured, deliberate. "You're going to leave this neighborhood. You're going to stay away from my wife, and you're going to do it today." The bikers exchanged glances, their cocky grins faltering slightly as they took in Jim's stance and the 2 alert German shepherds. The lead biker took a step forward, his boots scraping against the pavement. "Or what, old man?" he challenged. But there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Jim stood his ground, his military bearing evident in every line of his body. Rex and Max moved forward slightly, their growls growing deeper. The tension in the air was electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. The evening sun cast long shadows across the park as Maggie and Jim Reynolds walked side by side, their footsteps steady and purposeful on the worn path. Rex and Max padded silently beside them, their muscular bodies tense and alert. The group of bikers lounged near the playground equipment, their leather jackets gleaming in the fading light. Maggie's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her chin high. Jim's presence beside her gave her strength, his military bearing evident in every measured step. As they drew closer, the bikers straightened up, their casual poses transforming into defensive stances. "Time for you boys to move on," Jim called out, his voice carrying across the distance with quiet authority. Rex and Max moved forward slightly, their ears perked forward, watching the bikers intently. The largest biker, a burly man with a scraggly beard, stepped forward. "Well, if it isn't the old-timer and his mutts." He crossed his arms, trying to look intimidating. "You think you can tell us what to do, Grandpa?" Jim didn't rise to the taunt. Instead, he took another step forward, positioning himself between Maggie and the bikers. "This isn't your neighborhood. You've caused enough trouble." The biker laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. "Big talk from an old man. What are you going to do about it?" "I won't have to do anything," Jim replied calmly. "The police already have reports of your harassment and vandalism. You can leave now, or you can explain yourselves to them." Rex and Max moved forward, their low growls rumbling through the evening air. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, eyeing the dogs with growing concern. These weren't ordinary pets. Their training was evident in their focused stance and unwavering attention. "You think those dogs scare us?" The lead biker sneered, but he took a small step backward. "They should," Jim said simply. "They're trained military dogs. One word from me, and they'll show you exactly what they can do." The threat hung in the air. The other bikers exchanged glances, their earlier bravado crumbling in the face of Jim's quiet confidence and the dog's obvious training. "This is ridiculous," one of them muttered. "Come on, man. Let's get out of here." The lead biker's face darkened with anger and embarrassment. "You haven't seen the last of us," he spat. "You and your wife better watch your backs." "That's your final warning," Jim said, his voice hardening. "Next time, I won't be so polite." Rex and Max barked sharply, making several of the bikers jump. The group began backing away, trying to maintain their tough image but clearly rattled. They mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life in a show of defiance. "You're gonna regret this," the lead biker called out over the noise. "Both of you." The bikers peeled out of the park, their engines echoing through the quiet streets. Jim watched them go, his posture remaining rigid until the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner. Only then did he turn to Maggie, his expression softening with concern. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Maggie nodded, releasing a shaky breath. "Yes, thank you, Jim." They stood together in the growing dusk, Rex and Max still alert at their sides. The park was peaceful again, but the bikers' threats lingered in the air like storm clouds on the horizon. Jim's jaw was set in determination. He knew this victory, while important, was just the beginning. Jim and Maggie walked back to their house in silence, Rex and Max padding quietly beside them. The setting sun painted long shadows across their front yard, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. Jim held the door open for Maggie, his weathered face set in determined lines. Inside, Maggie sank into her favorite armchair, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but the tight knot of fear in her chest had loosened a bit. Rex came over and placed his head on her knee, his warm brown eyes looking up at her with concern. "You did good out there," Jim said, settling into his chair across from her. He reached down to pat Max, who had taken up his usual position at Jim's feet. "Standing your ground like that? It wasn't easy." Maggie managed a small smile. "I was terrified," she admitted, running her fingers through Rex's fur. "But having you there, and the dogs, it made all the difference." Jim nodded, his expression softening as he looked at his wife. "Those thugs aren't used to people fighting back. That's why they prey on folks they think are vulnerable." "Do you really think they'll stay away?" Maggie asked, voicing the worry that had been nagging at her since they'd left the park. Jim leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "They might come back," he said honestly. "But we'll be ready. We're not alone in this anymore. The whole neighborhood's watching now." Maggie glanced out the window at their quiet street. Several neighbors had witnessed the confrontation, and a few had even stepped onto their porches in support. The solidarity had been unexpected but welcome. "I just wish—" Maggie paused, absently stroking Rex's head. "I wish I could feel safe again, like before." Jim stood up and crossed the room to kneel beside her chair. His strong hands covered hers, steady and warm. "We'll get there," he promised. "One day at a time. For now, we stay vigilant, keep our eyes open, and stick together." The evening settled around them peacefully enough. Jim made dinner while Maggie took a hot shower, trying to wash away the stress of the day. The familiar routine of their evening helped calm her nerves, Jim setting the table, the dogs watching hopefully for dropped food. The quiet clink of silverware. But underneath the normal facade, tension lingered like static electricity before a storm. Every passing motorcycle made them pause. Each unexpected sound drew their attention. Rex and Max remained unusually alert, their ears pricking at the slightest noise from outside. As darkness fell, Jim double-checked all the locks while Maggie drew the curtains. They moved through their nighttime routine with practiced efficiency. But there was an underlying watchfulness to their actions that hadn't been there before. In the living room, the television provided background noise while Jim cleaned his old service pistol, 2IS, something he hadn't felt the need to do in years. Maggie sat nearby, pretending to read but mostly staring at the same page. The night settled in around their house, quiet and heavy with unspoken concerns. The dogs lay alert near the front door, occasional low growls rumbling in their chests at distant sounds. Though the immediate danger had passed, both Jim and Maggie could feel it. The weight of knowing this wasn't over just temporarily paused. Jim reached over and squeezed Maggie's hand. No words were needed, They both understood. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maggie's driveway as she stepped outside, ready to head to work. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze, her hand still on the doorknob, as her eyes took in the sight before her. Her car sat in the driveway, but it was barely recognizable. All four tires had been slashed, the windows smashed in, shards of glass sparkled like cruel diamonds in the early morning light. Deep gouges ran along both sides of the vehicle, and spray paint covered the hood with vulgar words and threats. Maggie's legs felt weak. She steadied herself against the doorframe, her other hand fumbling for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Jim's number. "They're back," she whispered when he answered. Her voice cracked. "The car! Jim! They destroyed it! I'm on my way!" Jim's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Don't touch anything. I'm leaving right now." Maggie sank down onto the front step, wrapping her arms around herself. The morning air felt colder somehow, and every rumble of a passing vehicle made her flinch. Rex and Max paced anxiously beside her, picking up on her distress. Within 15 minutes, Jim's truck came speeding down the street. He jumped out before it had fully stopped, rushing to Maggie's side. His face hardened as he surveyed the damage. "This ends now," he said, his jaw clenched. He helped Maggie to her feet and led her inside, Rex and Max following closely. In the kitchen, Jim poured her a glass of water while she called the hospital to let them know she wouldn't be coming in. "We need security cameras," Jim said, pacing the kitchen. "Motion sensors, better lighting. I'll call some of my old military buddies. They know about this stuff." He stopped and looked at Maggie. "We might need to think about moving." "No," Maggie said firmly, though her voice wavered. "This is our home. I won't let them drive us away." But even as she said the words, she felt the weight of fear pressing down on her shoulders. Jim sat beside her at the kitchen table, taking her hands in his. "Then we fight back. Smart. Strategic. We document everything. Build a case." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "But Maggie, you have to understand. These guys are escalating. They're not just trying to scare us anymore." Maggie nodded, feeling tears well up in her eyes. She blinked them away angrily. "I know," she whispered. I can't believe this is happening. Every time I think we're making progress, they come back worse than before." Through the kitchen window, she could see her destroyed car, a stark reminder of their vulnerability. The sanctuary of their home felt paper-thin now, as if at any moment it might tear apart and expose them completely. Jim squeezed her hands. "I'll make some calls. We'll get the car towed. File another police report." He paused, studying her face. "But first, I need to know you're okay." Maggie met his gaze, seeing the concern in his eyes. She wasn't okay. Not really. The constant threat had worn her down, chipped away at her sense of security piece by piece. In this moment, sitting in her own kitchen, she felt more exposed and defeated than she ever had before. "I don't know if we'll ever really be safe again," she admitted quietly, voicing her deepest fear. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Jim adjusted his jacket, his weathered hands steady despite the tension coursing through his body. Rex and Max stood alert at his sides, their ears perked forward, muscles taut beneath their thick fur. The familiar weight of his old military boots grounded him as he surveyed the biker's usual hangout spot, a run-down gas station at the edge of town. "You don't have to come with me," Jim said to Maggie, his voice gentle but firm. "I can handle this." Maggie shook her head, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "No, we do this together. I'm tired of being afraid." Jim nodded, pride swelling in his chest. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, strong, determined, unwavering in the face of adversity. They walked side by side, Rex and Max flanking them protectively. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder as they approached. 5 bikers lounged against their machines, their leather vests adorned with patches that spoke of their allegiance to chaos. The leader, the one who'd first threatened Maggie, straightened up as they approached, a sneer twisting his features. "Well, well," he drawled, "if it ain't the old-timer and his missus, come to beg for mercy?" Jim stepped forward, his stance relaxed but ready. Years of military training had taught him that true strength lay in control, not aggression. No begging today. "We're here to end this." The bikers laughed, but their laughter died quickly when Rex and Max moved forward, their growls low and threatening. These weren't ordinary dogs. They were trained military K9s, and every biker could see it in their focused, unwavering stares. "You think your mutts scare us?" Another biker stepped forward, but his bravado faltered when Max bared his teeth. "They should," Jim said calmly. "But more than that, you should be worried about me." He took another step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I've spent 20 years defending this country. I've faced worse than you, and I've won. You're nothing but schoolyard bullies picking on people you think can't fight back." The leader's face reddened. "You threatening us, old man?" "No," Jim replied. "I'm promising you. Leave my wife alone. Leave this neighborhood alone, or you'll find out exactly what a veteran and his K9s are capable of." The tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Maggie stood tall beside Jim, her fear replaced by determination. The bikers glanced at each other, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. "You've had your fun," Jim continued, "but it's over now. Next time you vandalize our property or threaten my wife, I won't be so peaceful about it." Rex and Max moved closer, their training evident in every controlled movement. The bikers began to shift uncomfortably, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of real opposition. The leader tried to maintain his tough facade, but Jim could see the calculation in his eyes. They were used to easy targets, elderly couples who would cower and retreat. Instead, they'd found a military veteran who wasn't about to back down. "Come on," the leader finally muttered to his crew. "These old folks ain't worth our time." One by one, the bikers mounted their motorcycles. The engines roared to life, a last attempt at intimidation that fell flat against Jim's unwavering stance. As they pulled away, the leader cast one final glance over his shoulder, not in threat, but in grudging respect. Jim and Maggie watched them disappear down the road, the sound of their engines fading into the distance. Rex and Max remained alert at their sides, ready to protect their family if needed. The morning sun painted the neighborhood in warm golden hues as Maggie stepped onto her front porch. The usual rumble of motorcycles was conspicuously absent, replaced by the gentle chirping of birds and distant sounds of children playing. She took a deep breath, savoring the peace that had finally settled over their street. Jim appeared beside her, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in his hands. Rex and Max lounged at their feet, their tails wagging lazily. "Quite a change, isn't it?" he said, handing her one of the mugs. Maggie wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic, letting out a contented sigh. "I almost forgot what quiet mornings felt like," she admitted, leaning against her husband's solid frame. The past few days had been a blur of tension and confrontation, but now it felt like a weight had been lifted. The bikers had finally understood that they couldn't break the spirit of this community, especially not with Jim, Rex, and Max standing guard. They'd packed up and moved on, leaving nothing but tire tracks and fading memories. "You know," Jim said, his voice soft with pride, "you showed real courage through all of this. Most people would have given up, moved away." Maggie smiled, remembering how scared she'd been at first. "We both did what we had to do. I couldn't have faced them without you, Jim." He shook his head, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You're stronger than you think, Maggie. You stood your ground even before I knew what was happening." The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of blooming flowers from their garden. Maggie watched as Rex and Max playfully chased each other across the lawn, their earlier vigilance replaced by carefree energy. "I feel different now," Maggie confessed, taking a sip of her coffee. "Stronger, maybe. Like we can handle anything that comes our way." Jim squeezed her shoulder gently. "That's because we can, together." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their neighborhood come to life. Mrs. Henderson from next door waved as she collected her morning paper. The Johnson kids rode past on their bikes, calling out cheerful greetings. Everything felt normal again, but better somehow, as if their victory over the bikers had made their peaceful life even more precious. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" Maggie asked, turning to face her husband. "What's that?" "That through all of this, we became closer, stronger." She reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears as he returned to the porch. "Our little family proved unshakable." Jim's eyes crinkled with emotion. "We've always been strong together, Maggie. Sometimes it just takes a challenge to remind us of that fact." The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as they finished their coffee. Maggie felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. The fear that had gripped her heart during those tense days with the bikers had transformed into something else, a quiet confidence in herself, in Jim, in their bond. "What do you say we take these two for a nice long walk?" Jim suggested, gesturing to the dogs. "Enjoy our peaceful neighborhood properly?" Maggie nodded, her heart full. "I'd like that very much." As they prepared for their walk, Maggie caught Jim's hand and squeezed it tight. The simple gesture carried all the words they didn't need to say: their love, their gratitude, their shared strength. They had weathered this storm together, and their bond was stronger for it. The dogs bounded ahead eagerly as they stepped off the porch, ready for their morning adventure. The street stretched before them, quiet and inviting, finally restored to the peaceful haven they had always known it to be. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Maggie prepared her coffee, humming softly to herself. 3 weeks had passed since the bikers had left town, and the neighborhood had settled back into its peaceful rhythm. But something was different. Something had changed within her. She caught her reflection in the window and noticed the way she held herself now. Shoulders back, head high, a quiet confidence in her stance that hadn't been there before. The fear that had once gripped her heart when she heard motorcycle engines had faded, replaced by an unwavering sense of strength. "Morning? Beautiful," Jim said, entering the kitchen with Rex and Max at his heels. He wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her cheek. "Ready for work?" Maggie smiled, turning to face him. "More than ready. You know, it's strange. I used to dread leaving the house during that whole ordeal. Now, I can't wait to get to the hospital." At work, Maggie's transformation was evident to everyone around her. She walked the hospital corridors with purpose, her nursing uniform as much a symbol of authority as it was of care. When a frustrated patient raised his voice at one of the younger nurses, Maggie didn't hesitate to step in. "Sir," she said firmly, meeting his gaze, "we're here to help you, but we need to maintain a respectful environment. Would you like to try that conversation again?" The patient blinked, surprised by her direct approach, then nodded sheepishly. The young nurse shot Maggie a grateful look. During her lunch break, Sarah, one of the newer nurses, approached her table. "Maggie, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey." "Sit down. I've noticed how different you seem lately. Stronger, more confident. What changed?" Maggie set down her fork, considering the question. "I learned that staying quiet doesn't make problems go away. Sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it's scary." She shared a simplified version of what had happened with the bikers, watching Sarah's eyes widen. "The thing is," Maggie continued, "I always had that strength inside me. I just needed to find it." That evening, as she drove home, Maggie reflected on how the experience had changed her. She no longer scanned the streets nervously for threats. Instead, she moved through the world with a new awareness of her own capability. Jim was waiting on the porch when she pulled into the driveway, Rex and Max lounging at his feet. As she approached, she saw the pride in his eyes, not just for how she'd handled the bikers, but for who she'd become in the aftermath. "You're different," he said softly as she sat beside him. "Stronger." Maggie leaned against his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I am stronger," she agreed. "But I didn't do it alone. You showed me what courage looks like, Jim." He squeezed her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence. Rex and Max dozed at their feet, peaceful guardians of their hard-won tranquility. The street was quiet, but Maggie no longer feared the silence. She had found her voice, and she knew now that she would never lose it again. "You know what?" she said, turning to Jim. "I think I'm actually grateful for what happened. Not for the fear or the harassment, but for showing me what I'm capable of." The community center buzzed with nervous energy as women of all ages filled the rows of folding chairs. Maggie stood at the podium, her hands steady now where they once might have trembled. Jim sat in the front row, Rex and Max lying quietly at his feet, their presence as reassuring as always. "I used to think staying quiet was the safest choice," Maggie began, her voice clear and strong. "I believed that if I didn't make waves, if I just kept my head down, the trouble would pass." She paused, meeting the eyes of several women in the audience. "But I was wrong." The room fell silent, every person hanging on her words. Maggie saw recognition in their faces, the same fear she'd once felt, the same hesitation to speak up. "When those bikers started harassing me, I wanted to hide," she continued. "I made excuses. I told myself it wasn't that bad." She glanced at Jim, drawing strength from his proud smile. "But my husband taught me something important. Staying silent only gives power to those who want to intimidate us." A woman in the third row wiped away tears, nodding. Another reached out to squeeze her hand. "It's not just about bikers or any specific group," Maggie said, her voice growing passionate. "It's about standing up to anyone who tries to make us feel small, afraid, or powerless in our own communities." She shared the details of her story, the initial confrontation, the vandalism, the threatening notes. With each word, she saw recognition dawn on more faces. These women had their own stories, their own fears, their own battles. "But here's what I learned," Maggie continued, straightening her shoulders. "When we find our voice, when we refuse to be intimidated, we discover strength we never knew we had. And when we stand together, that strength multiplies." After her speech, women lined up to talk to her. Some shared their own stories of harassment, of feeling helpless, of wanting to speak up but not knowing how. Maggie listened to each one, offering the same understanding and support she'd received from Jim. A young nurse from her hospital approached, tears in her eyes. "I've been dealing with a stalker for months," she confessed. "I've been too scared to tell anyone. But hearing your story," she took a deep breath. "I'm ready to report him." Maggie reached out and squeezed her hand. "And I'll be right there with you when you do." As the crowd thinned, Jim made his way to her side. Rex and Max followed, their tails wagging as they sensed the positive energy in the room. "You did good, honey," Jim said softly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Maggie leaned into his embrace, watching as small groups of women exchanged phone numbers and hugs. They were building something here, a network of support, a community of strength. "You know," she said, looking up at Jim, "when those bikers first showed up, I felt so alone, but look at what came from it." She gestured to the room, where women were still talking, sharing resources, and making plans to meet again. Jim smiled, the pride evident in his eyes. "You turned something scary into something powerful. he said. "That's who you are, Maggie. That's who you've always been." Later, sitting in their living room with Rex and Max dozing at their feet, Maggie felt a deep sense of peace. The harassment had changed her, but not in the way the bikers intended. Instead of making her smaller, it had helped her find her voice, and now she was helping others find theirs too. Maggie stood in front of her freshly painted car, running her fingers along the smooth surface, where deep scratches had once marred the metal. The morning sun caught the new paint, making it gleam like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. Jim came up behind her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Looks good as new," he said softly. Maggie nodded, but they both knew it wasn't just about the car. The physical damage had been easy enough to fix, a fresh coat of paint here, a replaced mailbox there. But the feeling of violation, the memory of fear that had gripped their peaceful lives, that wasn't so simple to repair. Inside their home, Rex and Max lounged in their usual spots by the window, ever vigilant. The dogs had become more than just pets during the ordeal. They were guardians, protectors, a constant reminder that they weren't alone. "I used to jump at every motorcycle sound," Maggie admitted, settling into her favorite armchair. Jim sat across from her, his eyes full of understanding. "Now, I just feel different. Stronger, maybe." "You've always been strong," Jim replied, leaning forward. "You just needed to be reminded of it." They had developed new routines in the weeks following the bikers' departure. Jim still took Rex and Max on their regular patrols, but it was no longer out of necessity. It was simply their way of maintaining the peace they'd fought so hard to protect. Maggie had started taking self-defense classes, not out of fear, but because she refused to ever feel helpless again. The neighborhood had changed too. Where once there had been silence and isolation, now there was connection. Neighbors checked in on each other more frequently. They exchanged phone numbers, created watch groups, and built a community that looked out for its own. "Remember when we first moved here?" Maggie asked, watching Rex and Max doze in the sunlight. "How quiet everything was." Jim nodded. "Too quiet, maybe. Sometimes it takes a storm to bring people together." They spent the afternoon working in their garden, another new routine they'd developed. The simple act of planting flowers and tending to their yard had become therapeutic. Rex and Max patrolled the perimeter, their presence a comfort rather than a necessity. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Maggie wiped the dirt from her hands and stood up. "Want to take a walk?" she asked Jim. He smiled, already reaching for the dogs' leashes. The evening air was cool and crisp as they stepped out onto their front porch. Rex and Max fell into step beside them, alert but relaxed. The street was peaceful, filled with the sounds of children playing, neighbors chatting, and birds singing their evening songs. Maggie's hand found Jim's as they walked, their fingers intertwining naturally. The fear that had once haunted these streets was gone, replaced by something stronger: resilience, determination, and an unshakable bond between them. "We did it," Maggie said softly, squeezing Jim's hand. "We did," he agreed, looking at her with pride. "Together." They continued their walk, their steps sure and steady, Rex and Max padding faithfully beside them. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, as if nature itself was celebrating their victory over fear. They were no longer just surviving. They were living, stronger and more connected than ever before. Maggie pulled her light jacket closer as she walked down the familiar sidewalk toward the hospital. The early morning air was crisp, and golden sunlight filtered through the trees that lined the street. Her comfortable nursing shoes made soft sounds against the pavement as she enjoyed her morning ritual, a peaceful walk to start her shift. "Maggie! Oh, Maggie, wait up!" She turned to see Sarah Chen, her neighbor from 3 houses down, jogging to catch up with her. Sarah was still in her gardening clothes, dirt smudging her knees as she waved. "Good morning, Sarah," Maggie said warmly, slowing her pace to let the younger woman catch up. Sarah fell into step beside her, slightly out of breath. "I've been meaning to talk to you for weeks now," she said, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "About what happened with those bikers." Maggie's steps faltered for just a moment. Even now, weeks after the confrontation, her heart would sometimes skip a beat at the mention of those dark days. But the fear didn't overwhelm her anymore. It had transformed into something else entirely. Sarah continued, her voice soft but firm. "What you and Jim did, it meant so much to all of us in the neighborhood." Maggie blinked in surprise. "Oh, we just did what we had to do." "No," Sarah shook her head emphatically. "You did more than that. You showed us all that we don't have to live in fear. You know, after seeing how you handled it, I finally got the courage to report my ex-boyfriend for harassment." Maggie stopped walking, turning to face her neighbor fully. "Sarah, I had no idea. He'd been driving by my house, leaving notes, trying to intimidate me," Sarah explained, her hands twisting together. "I was so scared to do anything about it. But watching you and Jim stand your ground, it made me realize I could do the same." A warm feeling spread through Maggie's chest. She reached out and squeezed Sarah's arm gently. "How are you doing now?" "Better," Sarah smiled, her eyes bright. "The police took my complaint seriously, and he's been served with a restraining order. I finally feel safe in my own home again." They started walking again, their steps in sync. "You know," Sarah added, "Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner house told me she finally reported those teens who were vandalizing her garden. And Tom across the street stood up to his noisy neighbors who were having parties until dawn." Maggie felt a surge of emotion. She had been so focused on her own situation, she hadn't realized how her actions had rippled through the community. All those nights of fear, all those moments of doubt, they had meant something more than just protecting herself and Jim. "It's funny," Maggie said thoughtfully. "When all this started, I felt so helpless. I just wanted to hide away and hope it would all blow over." "But you didn't," Sarah pointed out. "You faced it head on. And that gave the rest of us courage, too." They reached the corner where their paths would diverge, Sarah back to her garden and Maggie toward the hospital. The morning sun had risen higher now, warming Maggie's face as she turned to say goodbye to her neighbor. "Thank you for telling me this, Sarah," Maggie said sincerely. "It means more than, you know." Sarah gave her a quick hug. "No, thank you, Maggie. You showed us what real strength looks like." As Sarah headed back down the street, Maggie stood for a moment, letting the morning breeze ruffle her hair. A smile spread across her face, slow and genuine. When she'd stood up to those bikers, she'd only been thinking about protecting herself and Jim. She never imagined that by finding her own courage, she'd help others find theirs too. The evening sun painted the sky in warm hues of orange and pink as Jim and Maggie sat together on their front porch swing. The gentle creak of the swing's chains mixed with the playful barks of Rex and Max romping in the yard. Jim's arm rested comfortably around Maggie's shoulders, and she leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and content. "Remember when we first met?" Maggie asked, her eyes following the dogs as they chased each other around the yard. "You were so quiet back then." Jim chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "And you wouldn't stop talking. Guess some things never change." Maggie playfully swatted his arm. "I was nervous. It's not every day you meet a handsome veteran with two giant German shepherds." "Those two were just puppies then," Jim said, watching Rex roll over in the grass while Max bounded around him. "Now look at them. Fierce protectors when we need them. Big softies the rest of the time." Maggie grew quiet for a moment, her hand finding Jim's. "I never thought I'd need protecting," she admitted. "All those years working as a nurse, dealing with difficult patients, I always felt strong enough on my own." "You are strong," Jim said firmly. "Standing up to those bikers? That took real courage, Maggie. I'm proud of you. She squeezed his hand. We're stronger together, though, aren't we? Always have been, Jim agreed. You know, when I came back from service, I thought I had to handle everything on my own, thought showing vulnerability meant showing weakness. And now? Maggie asked, looking up at him. Now I know better. Having someone to lean on, someone to protect and be protected by, that's real strength. Rex trotted up to the porch, his tongue lolling out as he rested his head on Jim's knee. Max followed close behind, settling at Maggie's feet. She reached down to scratch behind his ears. They've been such a blessing, Maggie said softly. I feel safe knowing they're always watching over us. Jim nodded. They're family, just like you and me. The sunset cast long shadows across their yard as neighbors walked by, waving friendly greetings. Some stopped to chat, thanking them again for standing up to the bikers who had terrorized the neighborhood. Each time, Maggie and Jim shared knowing looks. They hadn't just protected themselves, they'd protected their whole community. You know what I love most about sitting here? Maggie asked, watching a young couple stroll past with their children. What's that? I'm not afraid anymore. I don't jump at every motorcycle sound or worry about what might be waiting when I get home from work. We faced our fears together, and we won. Jim pulled her closer. We did more than win, Maggie. We grew stronger. Our love grew stronger. Rex let out a contented sigh, and Max's tail thumped against the porch boards. The evening breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from their garden, and somewhere in the distance, a wind chime played its gentle melody. I wouldn't change a thing, Maggie said, settling more comfortably against Jim's shoulder. Every challenge we've faced has brought us closer together. Jim pressed a kiss to her temple. And there's no one I'd rather face life's challenges with than you. The dogs perked up their ears at a passing car, then quickly settled back down, recognizing no threat. Their peaceful presence added to the tranquil moment, a reminder of the security and love that surrounded them. The evening sun painted golden streaks across the quiet neighborhood streets. Maggie stood at her kitchen window, watching the gentle sway of trees in the late summer breeze. No rumbling engines disturbed the peace. No leather-clad figures lurked at street corners. The bikers had been gone for weeks now, and the neighborhood had settled back into its familiar rhythm. She smiled as she watched Mrs. Peterson walk her poodle past their house, waving cheerfully. Just last week, the elderly woman had brought over a freshly baked apple pie, thanking Maggie and Jim for cleaning up the neighborhood. It seemed their stand against the bikers had earned them more than just peace. It had brought the community closer together. Rex and Max lounged on the front lawn, their watchful eyes still scanning the street out of habit. Jim had kept up their training, but these days it was more about routine than necessity. The dog's presence alone had become a symbol of security for the whole block. Maggie's hands moved automatically as she prepared dinner, chopping vegetables for a stew. The familiar motion was comforting, but different now. She no longer jumped at sudden noises or peered anxiously through the curtains. The confidence she'd gained stood firm, like a shield around her heart. "Something smells good," Jim's voice came from behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back into his embrace. "Just your favorite stew," she said, turning to face him. His eyes were warm, proud. They'd been through so much together, and somehow they'd come out stronger. "You know," Jim said, reaching for a carrot to snack on, "I saw Tommy from down the street today. He mentioned how his wife feels safer walking in the evenings now." He paused, crunching thoughtfully. "You did that, Maggie. You showed everyone it's okay to stand up for themselves." Maggie felt her chest warm with pride. "We did that," she corrected him, touching his arm gently. "You, me, Rex, and Max, we're a team." The kitchen timer chimed, and Maggie turned to check on the wrappers, bread in the oven. The rich, homey smell filled the kitchen, mixing with the savory aroma of the stew. This was what peace felt like, not just the absence of trouble, but the presence of something stronger, something earned. Jim set the table while Maggie finished preparing their meal. The routine was familiar, but it felt more precious now. Every quiet moment was a reminder of what they'd fought for. "Remember when I used to rush inside from the car?" Maggie asked, ladling stew into bowls. "Now I actually stop to chat with the neighbors." Jim nodded, his expression serious but soft. "You've changed, Maggie. You're stronger, not that you weren't strong before, but now you know it." They settled at the table, the warm glow of the setting sun streaming through the windows. Rex and Max had come inside, settling into their usual spots near the table. The only sounds were the gentle clink of spoons against bowls and the distant chirping of evening birds. Maggie took a deep breath, savoring the moment. The peace felt different now, richer, more valuable. It wasn't just the absence of fear. It was the presence of strength. She'd learned that sometimes peace had to be fought for, and that made it all the more precious. "This is nice," she said simply, reaching across the table to squeeze Jim's hand. He squeezed back, understanding in his eyes. They didn't need many words anymore. They'd been through enough together to know what really mattered. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Reynolds' backyard as neighbors and friends gathered for their monthly community barbecue. The aroma of grilled burgers filled the air, while children's laughter echoed from the adjacent yards. Maggie watched from the patio as Jim masterfully flipped burgers on the grill, Rex and Max lounging contentedly nearby. Sarah Thompson, their next-door neighbor of 15 years, approached with a warm potato salad. "This is just like old times," she said, setting the dish on the outdoor table. "Remember when we used to do this every weekend?" Maggie nodded, her heart full. "Things got a bit complicated there for a while," she admitted, thinking back to the days when the bikers had made their lives miserable. But maybe that's what we needed, to remember how important these gatherings are. More neighbors arrived, each bringing dishes and warm smiles. Tom and Linda from across the street, the young couple who had just moved in down the block, and even Mrs. Rodriguez, who rarely left her house, joined the gathering. They all had stood by the Reynolds during those difficult times, keeping watch, making calls, being present. "You know," Linda said, settling into a chair next to Maggie, "what you and Jim did, standing up to those bikers, it gave us all courage. We've lived here for years, but we never felt as connected to the community as we do now." Jim approached with a plate of perfectly grilled burgers, Rex and Max following closely behind. "That's what community is all about," he said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had seen them through the worst of times. "Standing together when things get tough." The conversation flowed easily as everyone settled in to eat. Stories were shared, not just about the bikers, but about all the times the neighborhood had come together. The winter storm 3 years ago when everyone helped clear each other's driveways. The fundraiser they organized when the local school needed new playground equipment. The time they all pitched in to help Mrs. Rodriguez repair her roof. Maggie looked around at the familiar faces, seeing them in a new light. These weren't just neighbors, they were family. Each person had contributed in their own way during the ordeal with the bikers. Some had called the police when they spotted suspicious activity. Others had simply made sure to check in on them regularly, letting them know they weren't alone. "You know what I've realized?" Maggie said to Jim as they stood together, watching their friends and neighbors interact. "Those bikers might have seemed like the biggest threat we'd ever faced, but they actually showed us something beautiful." Jim raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's that?" "They showed us the strength of our community," Maggie replied, her voice soft but firm. "We were never really alone, Jim. Even when we felt most threatened, we had all these people standing with us." Jim wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You're right," he said, watching as Rex and Max played with the neighborhood kids. Sometimes it takes a storm to show you who's willing to weather it with you. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Maggie and Jim stood together at the edge of their yard watching the horizon. The peaceful moment was made sweeter by the sounds of friendly chatter behind them, the presence of their beloved dogs, and the knowledge that they were surrounded by people who cared. This was more than just the end of a difficult chapter. It was the continuation of a story about community, about standing together, about finding strength in unity. As they looked out at the setting sun, Maggie squeezed Jim's hand, grateful for the life they'd built and the people who helped them protect it. The evening breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine across the porch as Maggie and Jim Reynolds stood side by side, their shoulders touching. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows across their peaceful neighborhood. Rex and Max lounged contentedly at their feet, occasional tail wags showing their relaxed state. Maggie took a deep breath, feeling the calm settle over her like a warm blanket. The street before them was quiet now. No roaring motorcycles, no threatening figures, no fear. Just the gentle rustling of leaves and distant children's laughter. "It's beautiful tonight," she said softly, leaning into Jim's solid presence beside her. Jim nodded, his weathered face peaceful. "Sure is. Different kind of beautiful, though, isn't it?" Maggie knew exactly what he meant. After everything they'd been through, peace held a deeper meaning. Every quiet moment felt earned, appreciated, treasured. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Maggie admitted, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the trees. "Not just safe, but strong." Jim turned to look at her, his eyes filled with pride. "You've always been strong, Maggie. You just needed to remember it." She smiled, thinking about how far they'd come. The fear that had once gripped her heart when she pulled into the driveway was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. She no longer scanned the streets nervously or jumped at the sound of motorcycles. Instead, she walked with her head high, knowing she could handle whatever came her way. "We both learned something, didn't we?" she said, reaching down to scratch behind Rex's ears. The German shepherd leaned into her touch, his eyes half closed in contentment. "About standing together, being there for each other." "That we did," Jim agreed, his voice warm. "Though I suppose I needed to learn when to step back too. Let you fight your own battles sometimes," Maggie chuckled. "While keeping Rex and Max on standby just in case?" "Always," Jim said with a wink, and they both laughed. The light was fading now, casting everything in soft purple shadows. A neighbor across the street waved as she walked her dog, and both Maggie and Jim waved back. These simple interactions meant so much more now. They were part of a community that had stood with them, supported them, helped them reclaim their peace. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" Maggie asked, turning to face her husband. "Not just that we got through it, but how we got through it. Together." Jim's eyes softened as he looked at her. He reached for her hand, his grip warm and secure, just like always. His touch carried years of shared experiences, countless moments of joy and pain, and an unwavering commitment to stand by each other's side. "Together," he echoed, squeezing her hand gently. "That's how we'll always be." Maggie squeezed back, feeling the truth of those words in her heart. The setting sun painted their faces in golden light as they stood there, hand in hand, surrounded by the peace they'd fought so hard to protect. They'd earned this tranquility, this strength, this deeper understanding of what it meant to face life's challenges as one. Rex and Max sat alert at their feet, faithful guardians of their hard-won peace. The evening settled around them like a gentle embrace, wrapping them in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together.